It's my privilege to welcome you today to this edition of Framing the Future, our series of webinars about issues affecting policymaking and program and project work in forestry here in Maryland in the years ahead. Our work is being recorded here today and will be available on the Maryland Forestry Foundation.org website and YouTube in the coming month. Past webinars are available on the site and will be available on YouTube in the coming month. We're very pleased to have you here today. It's my pleasure to welcome you and to introduce our moderator for the Framing the Future series, Megan Carr, a local forester in the city of Baltimore and the first Mel Nolan Fellow for the foundation. Megan, I'd like you to introduce the program today. It's a quite exciting one and very interesting. So welcome to all of you. Please join us for the remainder of the program. Megan?
All right, thanks, Gary. Yeah, so I'm very pleased to have our guests joining us today, and apologies, my lighting is going haywire. Just a few brief notes on some housekeeping as we're getting started. If you have questions for our panelists, we absolutely welcome those. We have some time set aside for the end of today's session for discussion, so please feel welcome to enter any questions into the Q&A box. For most folks, that should be found down at the bottom of your screen. Another quick note, if you're joining us for the first time and maybe the link was forwarded to you and you would like to join our mailing list, that is another option for you over at the Maryland Forestry Foundation website. So go to marylandforestryfoundation.org, and if you go over to the webinars page, you can drop your email into a little form and get added to our mailing list to be notified of upcoming sessions. But yeah, other than that, we're going to jump straight into things. Today is a really fascinating discussion that I'm very excited for. This topic came up recently and I was completely uninformed about it. So today is a great opportunity for me and a lot of other folks to learn about this emerging research and some of the policy implications around it. And we're going to be led off by Dr. Ning Zhang. Ning Zhang is a professor at the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science and the Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center at the University of Maryland, and affiliate professor with the Department of Geology and the Maryland Energy Innovation Institute. He earned a BS in physics from the University of Science and Technology of China and his MS in physics and PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Arizona. He has worked at MIT, UCLA, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, the Institute of Atmospheric Physics, and the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology. His professional interests include climate change and variability, carbon cycle and ecosystem, carbon sequestration, and other technical solutions and policy implications of climate change. He is a Clarivat highly cited researcher and on Reuters' hot list of top climate scientists. He's a founding co-chief editor of the journal Earth System Dynamics and was chair of the 9th International CO2 Conference. He is also a contributor to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Reports and the Global Carbon Project. He served on the U.S. CLIVAR panel and the U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Working Group. And so we are very excited to be joined today. And I will turn it over to Dr. Zhang.
Thank you, Megan. Do you see my screen now?
We're still seeing the full panel. If you want to switch to presenter view. That looks great.
Okay. First, I want to thank the Maryland Forest Foundation for inviting me to this exciting looking event. I'm very happy to join two other panelists to talk about this novel technology called wood harvesting and storage with Wood Vault. Essentially, very sustainably sourced woody biomass to securely remove carbon and to combat climate change. So let me start from the question that has been asked a lot lately around the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. What's killing our oak trees? Especially the Maryland state tree, white oak, has been suffering a dying epidemic. I moved into University Park in 2001. I had 6 beautiful oak trees in my backyard. They have died one after another. So that brings up to this conservationist dilemma. We all love trees. We want to protect trees. However, climate change and other problems are killing our trees. So the question first to ask is, where do the dead trees go? Here's one place it goes. Here's where Sean Preston works, Camp Small, Baltimore, where urban tree removal are temporarily put here in this transfer station, and that eventually most typically end up as mulch. And the mulch market is saturated, and mulch piles generate methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. So the carbon goes back into the atmosphere within a very short amount of time. On the other hand, the climate emergency has become such an urgent issue. The UN IPCC panel has projected that we will need 10 gigaton CO2 removal each year, in addition to drastically reduce fossil fuel emissions in order to keep global warming below the 1.5 to 2 degree boundary. One thing we have seen is, being a climate scientist, is how fast, how severe the climate change is happening. When I started work on the climate change problem 20 years ago, we were thinking of 2100, 3-degree warming. So if anything, the speed of climate change is really surprising us, how fast everything's changing. So again, besides reducing fossil fuel emissions, the consensus science is that we will need to also remove actively a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. So how do we do that? One important direction is to leverage on nature's power, that is photosynthesis. So we're asking trees to help us again, even after they die. So the idea of wood vault comes along this vein of scientific research. The concept is actually rather simple, and we take wood residuals, dig a trench, bury it underground, below the active biosphere, which is typically within the first meter, where the decomposition of organic matter happens that returns CO2 back to the atmosphere. But if we put it below that level, additionally add a clay capping, we can keep the buried wood in an anaerobic, oxygen depleted condition so that the wood does not decompose. This process, in fact, is akin to the coal formation process, except that this is done at a much faster pace, really done at once compared to the geological timescale. So this is really a natural way of undo fossil fuel emissions. We call it reverse coal burning. So research has been conducted over the last 15 years. 2 demo projects have been done over the last 10 to 12 years. So the science is actually relatively straightforward. Each year, the terrestrial biosphere, trees and grasses on land alone would absorb 220 gigaton CO2 per year in a quantity called net primary productivity. That is 6 times as large as our annual fossil fuel emissions. So it's great, photosynthesis does it, but nature is in balance. Pretty much all of that photosynthetic carbon is released back into the atmosphere as leaves fall and decay and trees die and decompose. So nature basically is in balance. Only a small leakage over geological timescale in places like wetland, peatland, organic matter is buried for long enough time, millions of years, to become fossil fuel. So now this idea of actively manage the carbon cycle by taking a fraction In fact, just 4.5% of the net photosynthesis put it into long-term storage while maintaining sustainably the forest. So we're not talking about cutting down forests. We're talking about use the residuals, woody debris. And we will be able to produce a 10 gigaton carbon sink, 4.5% of the productivity. So that's enough to offset more than a quarter of present day fossil fuel emissions, which is also what the IPCC says we'll need in carbon removal in addition to fossil fuel emissions reduction. So another point I want to make is that because in this fast carbon cycle, carbon comes into the vegetation and goes back very quickly. So if we don't do it, for example, we let the trees to decay or be mulched, we don't utilize that for carbon storage, that opportunity will be lost. So the land is limited. So it's not like we can do it at one point and suddenly we can do a lot. So there is a sustainable source that we can use. So this is similar to compared to, for example, other well-known and loved methods like reforestation, forest protection. This method is like grow the chicken for the eggs, but not just for the chicken. So the chicken needs to be good and healthy so we can harvest eggs continuously. So it's a source that can last forever, a continuous stream of carbon. So this method has been assessed by a number of studies, including the 2019 National Academy of Sciences report. It stated wood harvesting and storage, WHS, could be viable approaches to increasing carbon removal. The technology is simple and easily applied. So more recently, we have recognized the value of carbon in trees versus the energy value compared to bioenergy use, which is another option. But it's increasingly clear that as the climate emergency becomes a bigger and bigger problem, the carbon value is becoming more and more important in terms of utilizing biomass. So what does it actually look like when we do a wood vault project? So here's the illustration, this particular type of wood vault, which is underground. You can think, let's say, an abandoned mine or quarry. The hole needs to be filled anyway, so we can fill it with woody biomass and then cover it with soil. On top, we can still graze cows or even build a solar farm on top. So you can practically do a lot of things on it, including growing crops. The actual operation involves digging a trench, lay down the wood, and then cover the soil, and then eventually with the original topsoil on the very top to minimize soil disturbance and carbon loss. So these images are actually from the Montreal pilot project that was carried out 10 years ago. Now it's still being monitored and researched. So a few of the key numbers, as you can imagine, this does not require inventing unknown fancy technology. It's really just civil engineering. We know very well how it works. And the cost we have estimated based on operation at the industrial scale, as well as our pilot projects, is between 20 to 100 ton CO2. Where you have co-benefits like dealing with waste problem, this cost could even be negative in some circumstances. It's distributed and highly scalable, so it's not going to be controlled by a big monopoly company. It's going to be employed around the world by local communities, and the local community makes sure it's done right. And the potential is very high. For the state of Maryland utilize wood residual that's unexploited at present. We estimate 1.2 megaton per year. That's enough to offset all the greenhouse gas emissions from the state's agriculture sector. So that series of pictures I showed from the Montreal project conducted a site 50 miles east of Montreal in 2021. And now, 9 years later, this is what the site looks like. So vegetation, grass has grown on top. And because it's at a corner of a cropland, it's nothing meant to be done to it. It was doing nothing anyway. So, but recovered, completely recovered. One of the most important avenues is wood residuals at present. For example, the America West is suffering from the fire problem. A lot of dead trees now standing there pose a risk of additional second burn, which is even more dangerous because it kills seeds. On the East Coast, in our area, fire doesn't seem to be a big problem, but as climate changes and temperature gets warmer, it could potentially have more fire problem as well. But we have a lot of this urban waste wood, which I mentioned earlier. And then there are other possibilities like storm blowdown and forestry residues. So in this case, you can compare a wood vault project with a baseline, which is critically important to what you're gaining by doing this. In this case, the baseline is actually really simple because this kind of wood, it just basically goes away in a few years. So you can keep that wood from decomposing, you just get this net carbon gain. So we estimate a global potential of 1 to 2 gigatons CO2. So to wrap it up, I want to ask the question how we can move this forward. We have demonstrated the science and the environmental impact can be kept at minimum and the cost is low. So what we really need now is a few pilot projects that can address the key scientific, engineering, and social-economic questions. So we are working on this pilot project right now at Cecil County, Maryland, on the Kilby Farm, where at the corner of the crop field where the soil is hydric soil, is not suitable for agriculture. And we are building this wood vault utilizing the wood residuals from Camp Small. And after enclosure of the vault, the surface will be regraded into this curvilinear structures that will help to enhance the biodiversity by creating amphibian habitat and spread pollinator species and so on. So finally, I want to ask this audience to help us with doing this pilot project by reaching out to communities in terms of potential siting, end-of-life quarries or not directly use farmland. The land footprint is very small. And also importantly, getting government agencies, NGOs at different levels involved. One of the things, for example, the Maryland Department of Environment is concerned, wood residuals considered a waste. So waste disposal is something that needs to be regulated. And we do know this is a very benign technology. We're talking about clean vegetation, no toxic chemicals or food scraps. It's totally clean vegetation, natural wood waste, what we call here. So working with different agencies to figure out a way that make it work best, both in terms of climate benefit as well as job opportunities and so on for the community. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for that solid introduction to what I'm sure is a much more complex question. And there are some questions around that already, so we will still have time to address those at the end of today's session. If folks have additional questions, do feel free to add those to the Q&A now, and we will discuss as many of those as we can during the last 10 to 15 minutes of our session today. But for now, we're going to keep moving on through and hear from the wood waste and municipal end of things. My colleague, Sean Preston, is here. Very excited to see him. Sean Preston is the recycling coordinator for Baltimore City's Forestry Division. In this position, Sean manages the city's sort yard, Camp Small, as well as its sawmill and wood reutilization program. When he's not grading, sorting, sawing, or making something out of wood, Sean enjoys being outside with his family and adventuring into Maryland's forests and streams. Hi, Sean.
Hi, nice to be here with you and everyone else. And Ning, it's nice to see you. You as well, Harry. Let's see. I'm gonna just kind of do a quick overview of Camp Small and our program before sort of talking about how it benefits and ties into to the Wood Vault. So let me try to share my screen. That's not going well.
You're nearly there.
There we
There we
go.
go. Looks great.
Okay, so Camp Small is centrally located in Baltimore City. It's a 5-acre site here that's been utilized for, for the collection of the city's own trees when they come down or need to be removed. We get about 9,000 tons of material here annually. Our program started as a way of developing something that could capture higher value that was coming through here, materials with higher value. We started about 8 years ago, and since then we've developed our program from dealing with just raw material and finding uses for the material as it comes in raw log form and wood chips to producing milled material, to producing lumber, wood products, kiln dried lumber, and in doing so, we've sort of achieved a lot of success and become a model of what a municipality could do with the woody materials that typically are either in some areas landfilled or mostly turned into mulch. We work with Recreation and Parks, who we're a part of, to produce lumber for different various projects. Some like large interior projects, some more utilitarian projects. Just some numbers of things that we do. We produce about 15,000 tons or board foot of kiln dried lumber annually. Another 30,000 board foot of green lumber, and in addition to that, another 50,000 board foot of logs being recycled. So those logs, going to other sawyers or being utilized as they are for various projects. And we distribute about 2,000 yards of wood chips. Some recent projects that we've partnered with that we're excited about is working with Silburn, the Nature Education Center, and the Friends Group, and the Silburn Arboretum horticulture department to implement some of our products into their expansion and revitalization of the education center. White oak for cladding on the sheds, benches throughout the project, and some white oak siding for fencing. We work with lots of city schools to implement outdoor classrooms and community groups as well for play spaces and outdoor areas. So these are some examples of some of those projects at various schools. We've started working with the Maryland Zoo this past year and have supplied them with a lot of materials for many of their animals. This structure is for the goat corral So now the goats climb around on these logs and under the logs and through the logs and all over the place. But partnering with the zoo has been a lot of fun, and we've been able to repurpose a lot of material through this partnership. Here's some goats at play, and a painting that the goat there had made for us. So, all of that, I'll leave it at that since that's a fun picture. All of that, like said, that deals with about 9,000 tons, or rather 9,000 tons of material comes into Camp Small annually. And through all of these, repurposing efforts, we tackle about 20% of the material that comes in. The rest of it, we don't, the city, Camp Small, or the city doesn't have the capacity to deal with the remaining volume effectively or within house to create, a repurposed product. So currently, Baltimore City has to contract that work out. So we work with, as Ning had mentioned, he mentioned Northwest Recycling. So they have the contract with Baltimore City, and so that excess material needs to get hauled off by the contractor and is turned into mulch products. And exploring ways to better utilize that low value material is is something that we are seeking to find. It's when we were talking about 7,500 tons of material, and what Camp Small gets off of the street trees, the open park trees, makes up maybe about 10 or 15% of the total volume of wood debris that comes down in Baltimore City. So you multiply that up, and you assume that maybe the same, maybe let's hope that close to 20% of that is getting captured for higher value. You're still looking at 30,000 tons, 40,000 tons of material, that is either going to facilities where it's rotting away, is being landfilled, or is typically being mulched up. And Ning mentioned the negative impacts of mulch and the use of mulch for the production of mulch. So I'm going to leave my shared screen. So when Ning approached us with this idea, it was very exciting for us to partner with him, to see our material go to a project like this, that has such good environmental intention, and we see it as a great opportunity for expanding. We have in the works, the city would like to do a composting operation, and we are exploring the possibilities of pyrolysis and biochar, but the wood vault would be a very effective low carbon imprint, sequestering carbon to deal with not just the material that's coming to Camp Small, but all of that material in the region. So I look forward to at the end of this answering questions and getting into this conversation a little bit deeper. But I'll stop there for now.
Great, thank you, Sean. So yeah, again, very complicated topic, and we haven't even yet really delved very far into the complexities of policy on the subject. So thankfully, we have somebody here who specializes in that arena. So next up, we are joined by Harry Huntley. Despite growing up in urban Baltimore, Harry has had a love of agriculture from his first childhood visit to the 32nd Street Farmers Market, which he now manages. His degrees in agricultural science and economics from UMD give him a unique perspective on how to make philosophical environmental policy work within the gritty realities of farming. His professional experiences have varied from a small urban farm to the U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee. Now at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, Harry combines his on-the-ground expertise and diverse connections to create policy solutions that dramatically increase the speed and scale of environmental progress in the Chesapeake and Mississippi watersheds while supporting farm families. So, Harry, take it away.
Thanks, Megan. And yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't talk about in there is really my background is in crop agriculture, but I've gotten to work more and more on forestry through this, through some work that my colleague and I did for the Forestry Foundation, and then also in previous roles. And it's one of the things that I love about working in agriculture and even now in agriculture policies. There's just always something different. There's always a new thing to learn. It's so broad and so varied, and I'm really grateful I've gotten to do that with forestry. So the title of my presentation today is about actually what wood vaults are not. You've heard a lot about what they are from Dr. Zhang and from Sean, but under the law right now, a wood vault is a landfill, and wood vaults are not landfills. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Went a little too far. As Megan said, I work for the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. You can see our website here, but we're really all about speed. And to do that, we work on sort of 3 broad strategies. And our work is mostly what I call practice agnostic, right? We really try and refocus programs onto outcomes. And we think that when you do that, when you focus on an environmental outcome, be that nitrogen reduced or carbon sequestered or butterflies back in some habitat that they previously had, we think that that will allow for great new solutions to emerge. So right now, the way we do so much for environmentalism is say, all right, here's the 200 different things you can do to improve the environment, and you're welcome to do any one of them. And it would be much better if we can say, here's what we're actually trying to get at. American ingenuity, researchers like Dr. Zhang, private companies, go out and figure out the best way to get there. So I was really excited, though, to jump in on this work on the Wood Vault project with Dr. Zhang, because he came to me as a result of a law we passed in 2022, the Conservation Finance Act, that made it more clear that land under easement can participate in ecosystem service markets. And that's something that we talked about a lot in the paper that I mentioned that we worked on for the Forestry Foundation. So this felt like really an opportunity to say, okay, yeah, we set it up to be about outcomes. This is somebody who's got a way to sell outcomes, but he needs a little bit of help on how to permit the actual practice. And so I think it's pretty obvious, right? You guys have heard about wood vaults so far. It's very different from something like what you see here on my right. I hope it's your right as well. And yet, under our current state code, this is a snippet of Maryland's permitting regulations, they fall under the land clearing debris landfill category. So this is saying there's a whole definition of solid waste, and then there are solid waste acceptance facilities, and then this is a particular kind of solid waste acceptance facility, which is a land clearing debris landfill. And this is really meant for like when somebody's going to go put up a new development on a forest or on what maybe used to be farm or meadow land, and they got to bulldoze the whole thing and find somewhere to put that. But as we said, wood vaults are not landfills. And there's a lot of different reasons that this is not fully appropriate for wood vaults. First of all, nobody wants to live next to a landfill. And so if you start talking about it, even something that's environmentally beneficial as a landfill, what comes to mind is these pictures on the right. And so folks understandably don't necessarily want that in their community, even though we're talking about something really different. And that's a very charged issue for individuals, but also communities have made laws around that. I know in quite a few counties in the state, they've made it almost impossible to create new landfills of any kind, even these land clearing debris landfills, which are still even themselves quite different. So they've done that under their zoning regulations. And so if you're getting classified at the state level, which this is state permitting, as a landfill, then under at the county level, they're going to say, oh no, well, you aren't allowed to build that in this zoning area because we specifically say you can't have any kind of landfill there. Or they may have thrown up other understandable barriers to why they don't want landfills in their community. So we started thinking about how do we change this? And that led to the introduction of a bill led by Delegate Lehman that would do a couple of different things, but the real gist is to say wood vaults are not landfills. And you can see here the bill was withdrawn. I didn't realize I was in that screenshot when I cropped it, but this bill got introduced at this session, and that was really the main thrust of it. The first thing you got to do then is say, what is a wood vault? And so this is the definition in the bill that we came up with. And I think some of you might have suggestions for how this could be better. I know I saw Beth Hill is on the call, and she gave me some really good thoughts on how to better define what we called in here woody biomass, because that's a really crucial part of this. But I'll give you all a second to just take a look at this. And the point is, you're taking some kind of wood that is residual and is not containing anything other than wood. And you're putting it in a specially developed structure so that it doesn't decompose and release carbon. That's the gist. And we think, when writing legislation, there's easily lots of different little things that you got to be really careful on. So like, for instance, we thought it was very important to say this, that it is a structure that's specifically designed for it. We thought it was important to make sure nobody wants toxic chemicals. So these are all the little things. And I think there, as I was saying, are probably even more little things that we can work on to make this definition more tight. But the point is to say really clearly, if we're going to define something as not a landfill, we better be really sure what that thing is, because we don't. The last thing I think any of us want is for this to be some kind of Trojan horse. So then we had two different options, and we kind of went around the road with one of them and then with the other, and then turned out neither one quite worked this session. So we'll have to take another bite of the apple. Option one, and this is how we originally wrote it, was just to say, it's not a landfill, so you don't have to do anything with it. This is nature-based infrastructure. This is something that is very low risk. And so the state really can more or less butt out. Not saying anything about local communities. If some folks really have an issue with what a wood vault actually is, of course they could find a way to say we don't want this in our county. But the state didn't need to permit it in the way that they permit landfills, because it doesn't have the same risk as landfills, because it's not a landfill. And fundamentally because it's doing something positive rather than trying to mitigate how bad something negative is. So we went with option one. We thought we had a pretty good case to make on that. The Department of Environment did not like that way. So then we moved to option two, and we said, look, this isn't a landfill. It's something different. You've got landfills here, you've got wood vaults here, and if you have real concerns, if the state has things that they think are important to check, they were like worried about fire risk, then you can create a way of permitting that's appropriate to the risks and needs of a wood vault, recognizing it's distinct from a landfill. And this would, again, solve some of our issues at the county level as well, because we can more clearly say, look, this is something distinct. This is not a landfill. It's something new. And so you can allow it in your zoning. So we tried option two. We wrote a bill on that. That's the bill that eventually got introduced, and it didn't quite work out. But I think the first option is still a really good one. And I think one of the things we're going to have to look at going forward is, do we want to go with option one? Do we want to go with option two? Or maybe there's some third option. And what I'm thinking about now is, could we work on some kind of more general, what's called sandboxing, where we say for nature-based infrastructure, we can create really small pilot projects that are exempt from permitting. And I'm not talking just about wood vaults. I'm saying this could be general. And you have to have really strict guardrails to make sure that only certain things that genuinely are low risk are accepted into that, but that they would be able to go and pilot a new solution to what is really a very urgent crisis. So that's our potential option 3, but there's a lot to think about between now and the next legislative session. We're not even done with the current one. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and I think we've got quite a few in the chat, so maybe we can all work on them together.
Great, thank you, Harry. Yeah, so we do have a few questions in the chat already, and we will go ahead and start discussing some of those. As always, folks in the audience, do feel free to add additional questions. We're going to answer as many as we can. To start off, I think a couple of the questions that we have from folks are kind of on a similar theme that might just kind of be under the broad heading of net carbon. So, so from Jason, what are the energy requirements to create a wood vault of a particular storage capacity? If all of the energy requirements were derived from fossil fuels, what would the CO2 impact be to create the wood vault? And similarly from Thayer, what is the relative cost in carbon for having to dig out a vault if a quarry or mine is not available for filling? And is it worthwhile to chip the wood to achieve more efficient use of space?
I guess I can answer that question. We have done a couple of demo projects, like the first 100 ton conducted at Cecil County. The fossil fuel emissions resulting from transporting the logs for 50 miles, and the construction comes to 5% of the carbon sequestered, 5%. And that's not the best optimized situation. So we think it could get down to 2%, maybe possibly 1%. So for now, we gave it a range of 2 to 5%. And the second part of the question, the volume, if you chip it, I think it was make the transport and so on a little bit easier, and was probably save a little bit space. But I actually just put out a link to a YouTube video you can watch, see how it's actually done. With whole logs, like the kind of pretty regular sized logs of Camp Small, it can actually be also made very compact. We basically lay down the logs one by one. Another reason for whole logs is it's more resistant to decay. So when you chip into smaller pieces, the surface area is larger, more cellulose is exposed to the environment. So it has a higher chance to decompose. So make the durability, less long. So for that purpose, we prefer large logs, but I think wood chips is also possible when everything, is well controlled.
Thank you. Yeah, and sort of a similar question from Lori in terms of both that carbon question, the net carbon question, and potential alternative uses. The transportation, excavation of the wood vaults will contribute carbon to the atmosphere and potentially be destructive if there are no existing mines near the biomass, and a hole needs to be dug, or more carbon to transport the waste. It seems producing biochar from the waste is less carbon intensive, and the product can be used as a beneficial filter, soil amendment, etc. Have you compared those potential uses?
Yes, I'm not a biochar expert myself, but I have colleagues who are biochar experts. So indeed, biochar is another way of utilizing wood residuals. So in that sense, they would be competing for the same biomass resources at a certain point, even though right now there are a lot of wood residuals around. So some of the key differences are wood vault uses raw biomass. So it's more higher carbon efficiency. Pretty much 100% of the carbon is used for carbon sequestration, while biochar, depending on how it's made, the temperature and so only a fraction, 20, 50% is used for carbon sequestration. Of course, you can potentially get energy value out of that. So there's a trade-off. And then typically the biochar, when it's applied, it's at the surface soil. So the durability is expected to be different. So when bury wood underground below the oxygen layer, gives a durability of 1,000 years or longer, so which is typically longer than biochar's expected time. So that said, there is actually a potential to bury also biochar. So Professor Paul Aldenweyer at University of Minnesota, he actually specifically works on this technique. He would pyrolyze in this low temperature pyrolysis process and then bury it the way we describe wood vault. So of course, there is the economics as well. For creating biochar, if you take the wood, shape it, and char it, and then distribute it, so there is a whole logistic issue and associated economic and fossil emission cost. While wood vault has a great advantage relative to many other biomass uses, it's because of its local nature. You can pretty much find a suitable site within short distance of your wood source, so which significantly reduces the cost and the residual fossil fuel emissions. So of course, this all depends on specific situation. So I see them as a complementary, depending on the local situation. We can decide which one is more productive.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, sorry?
Sorry.
No, go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was going to add a couple things to that. Since we at Camp Small have been, exploring the option of paralysis and biochar here, what we have found is that, some of the units that we have that we think would work best with what we get here is units that we can feed our wood chips into. So a natural byproduct from the tree removal operation, where no further processing is happening to that material to go into the paralysis. We're not talking about open burning containers, but paralysis units for biochar. And at Camp Small, we get 12,000 cubic yards of wood chips annually. So you can imagine what the region would get. It's a huge quantity. There isn't a lot of use for that material. There is a lot of use for it, but it doesn't get used in a lot of ways. So you can compost that material really well, but at the quantity that there is out there, it is problematic for most people who are dealing with that material. Putting that into paralysis makes complete sense to me. And where Ning was talking about utilizing the whole logs for the wood vault, how that has a better impact than a chip or than a shredded material, especially with a shredded where you're reprocessing it, right? So, I think that there's a lot of room, and it makes sense for both things to be working together. And also I wanted to mention, when Ning had said that, that 5% of the carbon captured was used in the transportation of the material from Camp Small to the Kirby farm 50 miles and for the digging of the vault, and that could go down easily to maybe 2%, maybe even 1%. When you're looking at that, it makes total sense that if Ning was able to find, if we were able to find areas like quarries, where the land is, the hole is already exposed, and and 50 miles is quite a distance. So if we could find the log sources closer to the areas where they're being dug, then easily that could be reduced down to a 1% or 2%. Just wanted to paint that picture a little bit. So that's all.
Yeah, thanks for adding those. And I think that in some ways overlaps with another question that we have of just trying to, from Jason, what is the current amount of wood waste generated in Maryland? What is kind of the scale of this potential operation, both for this and for some of those other operations? Do we happen to know at the state level?
The amount of biomass presented statewide is in excess of 1 million tons. Okay, but remember, one of the issues that Harry has raised is how to define biomass. And the types of biomass we're talking about compared to the wood that would be eligible for a vault may be a little bit different, and is one of the issues that needs further discussion in a policy sense, Harry. But we've looked broadly at biomass, kind of the, what can I say, the waste stream across the state, and it is more than sufficient to provide an opportunity to test this strategy.
All right, I think we have a couple of other questions, including, I think, kind of touching on the policy end of things. What is the reason or benefit to defining woody biomass in the first place? And where does the need for that come from? And would there be value in exploring alternative terms? One of our audience members suggested something like untreated wood waste.
Well, I'll simply respond to that and say, yes, we do need to explore some alternative definitions. As a matter of fact, in this particular policy sense, it would be critical, I think, for future legislation in this area to make clear that we're defining biomass for the purposes of implementing a carbon cache or a wood vault in this particular way, which is separate from the way we've defined biomass in terms of the carbon market generally, where it's used as fuel and other fuel sources in other areas. So I think this discussion needs further elaboration, because right now there is a definition of biomass in law. And right now, the thing that you're talking about seems to contrast with that definition. And therefore, we need to look at the differences in outcomes and purposes and how that might separate out what we're really looking for. And so I'm really pleased that the foundation is able to present this topic and the research it's based upon. I think it's very provocative and provides us with the opportunity to further discuss and hopefully to get policymakers further intrigued by the need to further discuss topics like this so that we can address climate impacts in a more innovative way than perhaps we have anticipated and planned for in the past, because clearly these new options expand our thinking. And I happen to be of the opinion that a mind expanded by a new definition never returns to its original dimensions, that we've expanded people's thinking, and now's the time to actually help them think through what the implications of that new idea is for policy, program, and project here in Maryland.
Excellent. Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, so we're going to squeeze in one or two more questions before we have to end the current discussion. But I'm sure we'll have future conversations on this topic coming for future months. From Morgan Grove, could this approach be a means for a city like Baltimore to engage in carbon offsets and to get credit for it? Also, is this something that should be incorporated into the city's sustainability plan? I'm not sure. Harry, do you have experience with carbon crediting and what might qualify for something along those lines, or is that less
I think
What do you-
one of the things that Dr. Zhang is looking at with this is making sure that anything that's done gets verified as a, clear carbon sequestration, which can be quantified. But I don't want to go out on a limb and start talking about offsets with it. I think not go out on a limb to make a tree pun. But I think, folks have some significant worry about the idea of offsets and that then lets somebody else pollute somewhere else. Without wading too much into that debate, I think it is really important to understand how many pounds of carbon we're sequestering here. Make sure that that is really strongly verified through a reputable certifier. And then there's different ways of getting paid for that outcome, be it as offsets, be it as governments buying pounds of carbon. But I will say one of the things we purposefully did with the bill was to not touch anything around carbon markets or offsets. It was really just about the permitting.
Right, thank you for that. So in the last 30 seconds or so that we have before 2 o'clock, just wanted to give our speakers another opportunity if there are final points that they had been meaning to make but hadn't had the opportunity.
I just want to jump in super quickly. Sorry, Dr. Zhang should go, but to respond to the question from Jason about why not just call it ag best management practice, we think that's a really good idea, and that's something we're looking at further.
Yeah, I may add that because of the climate challenge, so we really need to go beyond business as usual in terms of trying to find solutions. So there is a whole international and national effort, for example, spearheaded by Biden administration's Department of Energy, looking at these methods, make sure they are done right. There are international standards that have been developed and are being developed to make sure they are done right. So Maryland, given that it's a technology coming out of the state university's research, Maryland has the opportunity to take the lead in implementing this technology and hoping to satisfy the state's very advanced climate goal.
Well said. Well, just wanted to thank all of our speakers again for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion, and we really appreciate you taking the time out. And Gary, I
Thank
leave
you
it to
for
you.
having us.
Well, thank you very much, Megan, for your moderation today, and thanks, panel. I want to join Megan in thanking all of you. Excellent job. I'm really pleased that the foundation can be a part of presenting this idea. It's innovative. It, I think, has some practical implications, and frankly, it deserves further discussion and more wide distribution and consideration by key policymakers and the agencies involved in helping to support the implementation of this work. I want to invite all of you to look for the recording on marylandforestryfoundation.org for this webinar and the others in the series of Framing the Future. But I also wanted to conclude this session, as I will the next several, with an announcement, and that is the foundation is very pleased to announce that it will be sponsoring, along with the University of Maryland, the Maryland Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources, and other partners, a brand new experience for high school students here in the region in the coming year. Over the next 3 years, we will be running a pilot in Urban Forestry Careers program on the campus of the University of Maryland. The first such program will be held in July of 2024, from July 7th to the 13th. Application for this program will be available on the Maryland Forestry Foundation website at the end of this month. This is a unique program, and it will be a privilege for only us to have about 40 students involved in this kickoff program. So if your high school or family is interested, we would like you to make application to the program in the coming months. All expenses are paid except for the small application fee that will be assessed if the student is selected. That provides us with the guarantee that people actually show up for the program and don't just kind of put it aside at the last minute. But the bottom line is, it's a unique program on future urban and forestry careers. More than a half dozen universities will be present in the program. You'll get a chance to provide a real comprehensive overview of what urban and community forestry is all about in the years ahead. So join us for this program in July. The application will be online later this month. At the University of Maryland, we'll continue to make available information, and full information about the program is available on marylandforestryfoundation.org website. I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank the panel again for sharing this innovative option for carbon sequestration and fighting climate change, in which Maryland's forests can be involved in the future. Dr. Zine, thank you for the privilege of having you join us today. It's very, very innovative work you're doing. And Harry, for the work you're doing on policy, and Sean, for the work you're doing in recovery of waste wood in an urban area, which is an ongoing problem throughout Maryland. I want to thank all of you for a really excellent panel today. Megan, we'll see you again next month, and we'll talk about new issues which will shape the future of forestry in Maryland. Thank you all for joining us today.